Jacob Miller sat quietly in his wheelchair, staring at the envelope in his hands. It was plain white, unremarkable except for the official seal stamped in red ink at the top corner. He knew what it meant before he even opened it. Legal trouble. Trouble he didn't need. Trouble he couldn't afford. His fingers trembled as he tore it open, pulling out the single sheet of paper inside. The letter wasn't long, but its words hit him like a punch to the gut. He was being summoned to court over unpaid property taxes. The land, a small plot passed down from his grandfather, was all he had left of his family. But now, they wanted to take that too. Jacob sighed deeply, folding the letter and tucking it back into the envelope. For a moment he closed his eyes, trying to push away the weight pressing down on his chest. He lived alone these days, in a modest house near the edge of town. The walls were bare, save for a few framed photographs. One of him in uniform, standing, beside his best friend, Daniel, another of his grandfather, smiling proudly next to the old farmhouse that once stood on the disputed land. Those pictures were reminders of better times, times when life felt full instead of empty. Jacob hadn't always been in a wheelchair. Once he'd been strong, capable, fearless. He joined the military right out of high school, eager to serve his country. But war changed everything. An ambush overseas left him with shattered legs and scars that ran deeper than skin. Physically, he survived, but emotionally, he was broken. Daniel hadn't been so lucky. He died saving Jacob's life during that attack. Every time Jacob thought about it, guilt gnawed at him like a relentless beast. Now back home, he struggled just to get by. His disability checks barely covered rent, let alone bills or groceries. Taxes? Those were something he tried not to think about. He figured if he ignored them long enough, maybe they'd go away. Clearly, he'd been wrong. Lisa Monroe, his attorney, called later that afternoon. She was kind, patient, and smarter than anyone Jacob had ever met. When she heard about the summons, she immediately offered to help. "Don't worry, Jacob," she said confidently over the phone. "We'll figure this out together." But Jacob wasn't convinced. "What's there to figure out?" he muttered bitterly. "They want money I don't have, Lisa. End of story." "You don't know that yet," she replied firmly. "Let's focus on getting you ready for court. We'll make our case and we'll fight for your rights." Jacob appreciated her optimism, but deep down he doubted it would make much difference. Still, he agreed to meet her at the courthouse the following week. If nothing else, it gave him something to do besides sit around feeling sorry for himself. The day of the trial arrived sooner than Jacob expected. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of his bedroom as he got dressed. He chose his least worn suit, the one he'd bought years ago for Daniel's funeral. It still fit well enough, though the fabric smelled faintly of mothballs. As he wheeled himself toward the bathroom mirror, he caught sight of his reflection. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his face looked thinner than usual. Stress had taken its toll. By the time he reached the courthouse, the parking lot was already crowded. Jacob parked his van in a handicapped spot and transferred himself carefully into his wheelchair. Taking a deep breath, he rolled up the ramp and into the building. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of polish and paper. People milled about, chatting softly or flipping through documents. Some glanced curiously at Jacob as he made his way to the courtroom. When he entered, he saw Lisa waiting for him near the front row. She waved him over, offering a reassuring smile. "You okay?" she asked quietly as he settled beside her. "Yeah," Jacob lied. Truthfully, his stomach churned with nerves. He hated being the center of attention, especially in places like this. Courts reminded him too much of hospitals, all those cold, sterile surfaces and judgmental stares. As more people filed in, the room grew louder. Jacob recognized a few faces from around town. Neighbors, shopkeepers, even a couple of veterans he'd met at support group meetings. They nodded politely or offered encouraging smiles, but Jacob avoided meeting their eyes. He didn't want pity. Not today. Finally, the bailiff called for order, and everyone stood except Jacob. At the front of the room, Judge Patricia Hayes took her seat behind the bench. She was an imposing figure, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through people. Her voice carried authority as she addressed the court. "Good morning," she began. "We are here today regarding the matter of—" She paused, consulting the file in front of her. "Jacob Miller versus the county concerning unpaid property taxes." Jacob swallowed hard, gripping the arms of his wheelchair tighter. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading. Judge Hayes scanned the room before fixing her gaze on him. "Mr. Miller," she said sharply, "please rise when I speak to you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jacob froze, unsure how to respond. Rise? How could he rise? Did she not see the wheelchair, or did she simply not care? Lisa leaned closer, whispering urgently. "Tell her, Jacob. Explain." But Jacob hesitated. He hated drawing attention to his disability, hated making excuses for something beyond his control. So instead of speaking, he remained silent, his jaw clenched tight. The courtroom fell eerily quiet. All eyes were on him now, waiting for his response. Even Judge Hayes seemed surprised by his lack of reaction. She repeated herself, her tone firmer this time. "I said, Mr. Miller, please rise." Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel sweat breaking out on his forehead. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head to meet the judge's gaze. His voice was low but steady when he finally spoke. "Your Honor," he said, "I can't stand. I'm paralyzed from the waist down." For a moment, no one moved. Then whispers rippled through the crowd, followed by a collective intake of breath. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others exchanged worried glances. No one had known, not even Lisa, that Jacob couldn't stand. Or perhaps they hadn't thought to ask. Judge Hayes studied him intently, her expression unreadable. For the first time since the trial began, the tension in the room felt almost unbearable. Whatever happened next would define not only this case, but also Jacob's future, and possibly the futures of countless others like him. The silence in the courtroom stretched longer than Jacob thought possible. Every second felt like an eternity as he held Judge Hayes's gaze, waiting for her reaction. His hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The weight of everyone's stares pressed down on him, but he refused to look away. If she wanted an explanation, he'd give it to her straight. "I'm paralyzed from the waist down," Jacob repeated, his voice firmer now. "I haven't stood in years, not because I don't want to, but because—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. Explaining himself wasn't easy, especially not in front of a room full of strangers. But he forced himself to continue. "Because every time I try, it reminds me of everything I've lost." His words hung heavy in the air. A few people shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another. Some looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Others tilted their heads, listening intently, their expressions softening with sympathy. Even Judge Hayes seemed taken aback, though her stern demeanor didn't falter. She studied him carefully, her sharp blue eyes narrowing slightly. "Is this true?" she asked finally, her tone clipped but less harsh than before. Jacob nodded, once his jaw clenched tight. "Yes, Your Honor." Lisa Monroe leaned forward again, speaking softly into his ear. "You should explain further," she urged. "Tell them why you can't—" "No," Jacob interrupted, shaking his head firmly. "I'm done explaining." He turned back to face the judge, meeting her gaze head-on. "If standing is what you need from me, then fine. I'll stand." Before anyone could respond, Jacob reached for the crutches resting against the side of his wheelchair. They were old, scratched from years of use, but sturdy enough to hold his weight when needed. With slow, deliberate movements, he positioned them beneath his arms and pushed himself upward. Pain shot through his body as he fought against gravity, muscles straining to support him after years of disuse. His legs trembled violently beneath him, refusing to cooperate fully, but somehow he managed to lock his knees and stay upright. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one had expected this, not even Lisa, who stared at Jacob with wide, disbelieving eyes. Several people stood instinctively, their hands flying to their mouths in shock. Others whispered frantically to their neighbors, pointing discreetly at Jacob as if afraid to break the spell of the moment. For a brief instant, the entire courtroom seemed frozen in awe. Judge Hayes watched silently, her expression unreadable. Her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of her bench, betraying the slightest hint of unease. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Mr. Miller, why didn't you tell us you could still stand?" Jacob hesitated, his breathing ragged as he leaned heavily on the crutches. Standing was harder than he remembered, physically exhausting and emotionally draining. Each second felt like a battle, both with his body and with the memories flooding back. Memories of the ambush, of Daniel lying motionless beside him, of the endless surgeries and rehabilitation sessions that followed. Standing didn't erase any of that pain, it only amplified it. "Because standing doesn't fix anything," Jacob said finally, his voice strained, but clear. "It doesn't bring back my friend. It doesn't make the nightmares go away. It doesn't undo what happened to me." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "But if standing today proves something to you or to anyone else, then fine. I'll stand." Tears welled up in Lisa's eyes as she listened, her heart breaking for the man beside her. She knew how much courage it took for him to push past his limits like this, to expose his vulnerabilities in front of a room full of strangers. And yet here he was, fighting not just for his land but for his dignity. In the audience, a young woman named Emily Grant wiped away a tear, her hands trembling as she clutched her notebook. Emily was a local journalist who had been following Jacob's story closely ever since she heard about the lawsuit. She admired his resilience, his quiet strength in the face of adversity. Watching him struggle to his feet now only deepened her respect for him and her anger toward the system that had failed him. As Jacob lowered himself slowly back into his wheelchair, the room erupted into murmurs. People exchanged hushed comments, some praising his bravery, others criticizing the judge for putting him in such a position. Even Richard Dawson, the opposing counsel, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Judge Hayes raised a hand, calling for silence. When the room settled, she addressed Jacob again, her tone softer this time. "Thank you, Mr. Miller, for clarifying your situation. Let's proceed." But the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted entirely. What had started as a routine legal proceeding had transformed into something far more personal, a reckoning not just for Jacob but for everyone present. The case was no longer about unpaid taxes or property disputes. It was about justice, compassion, and the sacrifices made by those who serve their country. Jacob sat quietly in his wheelchair, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he fought to steady his breathing. His hands still gripped the crutches, though he no longer needed them to hold himself up. Despite the physical toll standing had taken on him, he felt lighter somehow. Like he'd proven something, not just to the judge or the court, but to himself. Lisa placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. "You did good, Jacob," she whispered. "Really good." He nodded faintly, too tired to respond. But as he glanced around the room, catching glimpses of tearful faces and approving nods, he realized something important. He wasn't alone anymore. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't have to face it by himself. The courtroom buzzed with tension after Jacob's unexpected display of strength. People whispered among themselves, their voices low but charged with emotion. Some wiped away tears, moved by what they had just witnessed. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react to the raw vulnerability Jacob had shown. Even Judge Hayes seemed momentarily shaken, her usual stern demeanor giving way to something softer, more human. Jacob sat silently in his wheelchair, his breathing still uneven as he tried to regain his composure. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his grip on the crutches beside him. Though he was physically seated again, the weight of what he'd done lingered in the air. Standing hadn't been easy. It had cost him every ounce of energy he had, but it felt like a turning point. For the first time that day, Jacob sensed a shift in the room. The focus wasn't just on the lawsuit anymore. It was on him. on his story, on everything he represented. Lisa Monroe leaned closer to Jacob, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've made an impact," she said softly, her eyes scanning the crowd. "They're listening now." Jacob nodded faintly, though he didn't feel triumphant. If anything, he felt exposed, like he'd laid bare parts of himself he'd rather keep hidden. But there was no going back now. What happened next would determine whether this moment of courage had been worth it, or if it would all be for nothing. Before anyone could speak further, a voice rang out from the audience, cutting through the murmurs. "Your Honor." All heads turned toward the source, a young woman standing near the back of the room. It was Emily Grant, the journalist who had been following Jacob's story closely. Her cheeks were flushed and her hands clutched a notebook tightly, but her voice was steady as she addressed the judge. "I apologize for interrupting," Emily began, stepping forward despite the bailiff's disapproving glare. "But may I say something?" Judge Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the interruption. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Very well. Approach the bench, Miss Grant," Emily replied, making her way to the front of the courtroom. As she stood before the judge, her confidence grew. She glanced briefly at Jacob, then turned her attention to Judge Hayes. "Your Honor, I believe this case has revealed something far more important than unpaid taxes or property disputes. It's about the sacrifices veterans like Mr. Miller have made and continue to make for our country." The room fell silent as Emily continued, her words resonating deeply with everyone present. Mr. Miller served his nation honorably, risking his life and losing so much in the process. Yet here we are, debating whether he owes money on land that means everything to him. This isn't just about numbers or legalities. It's about humanity. It's about recognizing the debt we owe to those who've given so much. Emily paused, glancing around the courtroom. Her gaze landed on Jacob, who watched her with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "I've started a crowdfunding campaign to help pay off Mr. Miller's debts," she announced. "And I'm proud to report that it's already raised thousands of dollars overnight. People care about this issue, Your Honor. They care about Mr. Miller." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded in agreement, while others pulled out their phones, presumably to look up the campaign Emily mentioned. Even Judge Hayes seemed affected, her expression softening further as she listened. Richard Dawson, the opposing counsel, squirmed in his seat. He exchanged a nervous glance with his assistant, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were taking. Finally, he stood and approached the judge's bench, leaning in to whisper something. Whatever he said caused Judge Hayes to frown thoughtfully. After a moment, she nodded and addressed the court. "We will take a short recess," she announced, rising from her seat. "Please remain in the courtroom until we reconvene." As the bailiff called for order, the crowd began to stir. Some people approached Jacob, offering words of encouragement or patting him on the shoulder. Others gathered around Emily, congratulating her for speaking up. Jacob, however, remained quiet, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of support. He hadn't expected this. Not the standing ovation, not the donations, not the sense of solidarity filling the room. Lisa stayed close to Jacob, her hand still resting on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "I don't know," Jacob admitted, his voice barely audible over the noise. "This wasn't supposed to happen. I just wanted to get through the trial without causing a scene." "You didn't cause a scene," Lisa replied firmly. "You showed them who you are. That's not a bad thing." Jacob sighed, leaning back, in his wheelchair. He wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered in his mind. Would any of this actually change the outcome of the case? Or would it all fade away once the recess ended? Meanwhile, Emily found herself surrounded by curious onlookers eager to learn more about her crowdfunding campaign. She explained passionately how she'd created it after hearing about Jacob's struggles, hoping to rally the community around him. "It's not just about money," she emphasized. "It's about showing veterans like Jacob that we haven't forgotten them, that we appreciate their sacrifices." Her words struck a chord with many in the room, including Richard Dawson, who stood nearby listening intently. Guilt flickered across his face as he realized the role he'd played in bringing Jacob to court. He hadn't wanted to take the case. It was assigned to him by his firm. But now he couldn't ignore the moral implications of what they were doing. Quietly, he excused himself and stepped outside to make a phone call. When the recess ended, Judge Hayes returned to the bench, her expression unreadable. The courtroom fell silent as everyone waited for her to speak. Finally, she cleared her throat and addressed the room. After careful consideration, she began, "I have decided to dismiss the lawsuit against Mr. Miller. Furthermore, I am ordering the county to forgive the outstanding debt and provide Mr. Miller with access to resources specifically designed to assist disabled veterans." The room erupted into applause, many people rising to their feet to show their support. Tears streamed down faces and cheers echoed throughout the space. Jacob sat motionless, stunned by the verdict. For a moment, he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Was it really over? Had he won? Lisa squeezed his shoulder, smiling brightly. "You did it, Jacob. You fought for yourself, and you won." Jacob managed a weak smile, his emotions too overwhelming to fully process. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had supported him, the neighbors, the strangers, even Emily, who gave him a thumbs up from across the aisle. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Even Richard Dawson joined in the applause, though his smile was tinged with regret. Later, he would publicly apologize to Jacob, admitting that he only took the case under pressure from his firm. He pledged to donate his fees to Jacob's crowdfunding campaign and promised to advocate for policy changes benefiting disabled veterans. As the courtroom emptied, Emily approached Jacob, extending her hand. "Thank you for inspiring us," she said sincerely. "You've reminded everyone of the true meaning of sacrifice." Jacob shook her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone." With the weight lifted off his shoulders, Jacob allowed himself to imagine a future where he could finally move forward, not just legally, but personally. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. In the weeks following the trial, Jacob Miller's life began to change in ways he never expected. The dismissal of the lawsuit was only the beginning. What followed was an outpouring of support from the community that transformed not just his circumstances but also his outlook on life. It was as if the courtroom had become a catalyst, sparking something bigger than anyone could have anticipated. The crowdfunding campaign started by Emily Grant continued to gain momentum, far exceeding its initial goal. Donations poured in from all over, not just from locals but from people across the country who had heard Jacob's story through news articles and social media posts. Veterans organizations reached out, offering resources and connections. Strangers sent letters of encouragement, thanking him for his service and sharing their own experiences. For the first time in years, Jacob felt like he was part of something larger than himself. With the money raised, Jacob decided to renovate his grandfather's land. He envisioned turning it into a retreat for wounded veterans, a place where they could find peace, healing, and a sense of belonging. It wasn't just about honoring his grandfather's memory, it was about giving back to those who understood the struggles he faced every day. The idea excited him, filling him with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Lisa Monroe remained by his side throughout the process, helping him navigate the logistics of transforming the property. She introduced him to contractors, architects, and local officials eager to assist. "You've got a lot of people rooting for you," she told him one afternoon as they walked the perimeter of the land together. "Let them help." Jacob nodded, though he still found it hard to accept kindness without feeling indebted. "I don't know how to thank everyone," he admitted quietly. "This is more than I ever dreamed of." "You don't have to. Thank them," Lisa replied with a smile. "Just keep doing what you're doing. That's enough." As the renovations began, so did the visitors. Veterans from nearby towns started showing up unannounced, curious about the project and eager to lend a hand. Some brought tools, others offered labor or expertise. Slowly but surely the land began to take shape. A small cabin was built near the edge of the property, designed to serve as living quarters for guests. Trails were cleared, leading to quiet spots perfect for reflection. Even a vegetable garden was planted, symbolizing growth and renewal. One sunny afternoon, Emily Grant returned to interview Jacob for a follow-up article. She found him sitting on the porch of the newly constructed cabin, watching as a group of volunteers worked together to install a wooden sign at the entrance of the property. The sign read, "Miller's Haven, a place for healing." "This is incredible," Emily said, joining him on the porch. She pulled out her notebook, jotting down notes as she spoke. "How does it feel to see your vision coming to life?" Jacob hesitated, glancing at the bustling activity around them. "It feels surreal," he admitted. "Like maybe I'm finally doing something worthwhile." "You are," Emily assured him. "People need places like this. They need reminders that they're not alone." Jacob smiled faintly, though his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "That's why I wanted to do it. After everything that happened in court, I realized how much we rely on each other. I couldn't have done any of this alone." Emily nodded, scribbling furiously in her notebook. "Do you think you'll stay here? On the land, I mean?" "I think so," Jacob replied after a moment. "It's peaceful here, quiet. Feels like home again." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lisa, who carried a tray of lemonade and sandwiches. "Thought you two might be hungry," she said cheerfully, setting the tray down on a nearby table. "We've got plenty of food for everyone." "Thanks, Lisa," Jacob said gratefully, accepting a glass of lemonade. "You're always looking out for me." "That's what friends are for," she replied with a wink. Then, addressing Emily, she added, "Make sure you mention in your article how hard Jacob's been working. He deserves all the credit." Emily chuckled. "Don't worry. He'll get plenty of praise. But I also plan to highlight the community's role in making this happen. This isn't just Jacob's story anymore. It's everyone's." As the day wore on, more people arrived, including some of the veterans Jacob had met during his recovery. They shared meals, swapped stories, and laughed late into the evening. For Jacob, it was a reminder of the bonds forged through shared experiences, the kind of connection that transcended words. He felt lighter somehow, as if the weight he'd carried for so long was finally lifting. Later that night, as the stars began to dot the sky, Jacob sat alone on the porch, sipping a cup of coffee. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass. Behind him, the lights of the cabin glowed warmly, illuminating the faces of those inside. He listened to the distant hum of conversation and laughter, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He thought about Daniel often these days, not with sadness but with fondness. He imagined his friend standing beside him, clapping him on the shoulder, and saying, "You did good, Jake. Real good." The thought brought tears to his eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of pride, of closure, of hope. The next morning, Jacob woke early, unable to sleep past sunrise. He wheeled himself outside, eager to check on the progress of the retreat. To his surprise, he found Richard Dawson waiting for him near the entrance. The former opposing counsel looked nervous, shifting uncomfortably as Jacob approached. "Mr. Miller," Richard began, extending a hand. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Jacob studied him for a second before nodding. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted to apologize for everything. Taking that case against you was wrong, and I should have fought harder to stop it. I let my firm pressure me, and I regret that." Jacob didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured for Richard to sit on a nearby bench. "Why are you really here?" he asked after a moment. Richard hesitated, then shrugged. "I guess I needed to make things right. You inspired me, Mr. Miller. Your courage in that courtroom, it made me realize how much I've been neglecting my own values. I want to do better, starting now." Jacob nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Richard's words. "Apology, accepted. he said finally. But don't just say you'll do better. Show it. Advocate for veterans. Use your position to make real change. I will, Richard promised. And I'll start by donating my fees from your case to the retreat. Consider it a down payment on my promise. For the first time in a long time, Jacob felt a genuine sense of forgiveness. It wasn't easy. Letting go of anger rarely was. But it was necessary. If he could inspire even one person to act with kindness and integrity, then maybe all of this had been worth it. As Richard left, Jacob returned to the porch where Lisa and Emily were waiting. "Everything okay?" Lisa asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. "Yeah," Jacob replied with a small smile. "Everything's going to be just fine." And for the first time in years, he truly believed it. As the weeks turned into months, Jacob Miller's vision for the retreat took full shape. What had once been a neglected piece of land was now a thriving haven for veterans seeking solace and connection. The cabins were complete, each one cozy and welcoming, with simple furnishings and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. Trails wound through the property, leading to quiet spots where visitors could sit and reflect or simply enjoy the beauty of nature. A vegetable garden flourished under the care of volunteers, providing fresh produce for meals served in the communal dining area. Jacob spent most of his days overseeing the operations of the retreat, ensuring everything ran smoothly. He greeted new arrivals personally, offering them a warm smile and an invitation to make themselves at home. Many of the veterans who came were hesitant at first, unsure what to expect. But within hours, or sometimes minutes, they found themselves relaxing, opening up and connecting with others who understood their struggles. For many, it was the first time they'd felt truly seen and heard since returning home. Lisa Monroe visited often, bringing supplies or helping with administrative tasks. She marveled at how much Jacob had grown over the past few months. Gone was the man who had sat silently in court, weighed down by guilt and despair. In his place was someone who radiated strength and purpose. "You've come so far," she told him one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I couldn't have done it without you. Or everyone else," Jacob replied, glancing toward the campfire where a group of veterans laughed and shared stories. "It's not just me. This place belongs to all of us." Lisa nodded, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. "Still, don't underestimate the impact you've had. You've created something special here." Jacob smiled faintly, but didn't respond. Truthfully, he didn't think about himself much anymore. His focus was on the people around him, the ones who needed support, understanding, and a safe space to heal. Every time he saw a veteran leave the retreat with a lighter step or a brighter smile, he knew he was doing something right. Emily Grant also became a regular visitor, documenting the retreat's progress for her articles. Her stories reached thousands of readers, inspiring donations and volunteer sign-ups from across the country. She interviewed veterans, staff members, and even some of the local residents who had contributed to the project. "This isn't just a story about one man," she wrote in one article. "It's a testament to the power of community, compassion, and resilience." Her words resonated deeply with Jacob, reminding him of the importance of collaboration. He often encouraged veterans to share their own stories, whether through writing, art, or conversation. "Your voice matters," he told them during a group meeting one afternoon. "Don't be afraid to use it." The retreat hosted its first official event, a weekend gathering for wounded veterans and their families, just before summer ended. Dozens of people arrived, filling the cabins and setting up tents on the lawn. Activities ranged from guided hikes and fishing trips to workshops on coping with PTSD and rebuilding relationships. At night, everyone gathered around the campfire, sharing food, music, and laughter. It was a celebration of life, resilience, and hope. On the final evening of the event, Jacob addressed the crowd, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "When I started this project, I wasn't sure if anyone would care," he began, looking out at the faces illuminated by firelight. "But you proved me wrong. You showed up, not just physically but emotionally. You reminded me that we're stronger together than we are alone. He paused, glancing at Lisa and Emily, who stood nearby, listening intently. This place isn't mine, it's ours, and it's here for anyone who needs it. For healing, for friendship, for peace. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this journey. The applause that followed was heartfelt and prolonged, echoing across the hills. Several veterans stepped forward to shake Jacob's hand or hug him tightly. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes, including Jacob's own. Afterward, as the Idoe crowd dispersed and the fire burned low, Jacob stayed behind, staring up at the stars. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. He felt a profound sense of contentment, knowing that the retreat was fulfilling its purpose. Yet he also knew there was still work to be done. More veterans needed help, more resources needed securing, and more awareness needed spreading. Lisa joined him a short while later, handing him a blanket to ward off the chill. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly. Jacob chuckled, wrapping the blanket around himself. "Just thinking about how far we've come and how much farther we have to go." "That's a good thing to think about," Lisa replied. "Means you're looking ahead instead of back." "You're right," Jacob said, nodding slowly. "And honestly, I'm okay with that. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving forward." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the embers of the fire glow faintly against the darkening sky. Eventually, Lisa excused herself, leaving Jacob alone with his thoughts. As he reflected on the events of the past few months, he realized something important. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't about erasing pain or forgetting loss. It was about finding ways to live alongside those memories, to honor them without letting them define you. The next morning, Jacob woke early, eager to start the day. He wheeled himself outside, surprised to find Emily already there, typing furiously on her laptop. She looked up as he approached, smiling brightly. "Morning, Jacob. Thought I'd get an early start on my next article." "Already working hard, huh?" Jacob teased, joining her on the grass. "What's the topic this time?" "You," Emily replied simply. "Well, not just you. The retreat, the community, the whole movement you've inspired. People need to know what's happening here." Jacob shook his head, laughing softly. "I'm just one guy, Emily. Don't give me too much credit." "And I keep telling you, you're more than just one guy," Emily countered firmly. "You've given people hope. That's no small thing." Jacob didn't argue further, knowing it wouldn't change her mind. Instead, he changed the subject. "Any updates on the fundraising campaign?" "Actually, yes," Emily said, closing her laptop and turning to face him. "We've hit another milestone, enough to expand the retreat and add more programs. Therapy sessions, job training, even recreational activities like art classes and yoga." "That's amazing," Jacob said, genuinely thrilled. "We'll need to hire more staff, though. Can't do it all ourselves." "We'll figure it out," Emily assured him. "One step at a time." As the day unfolded, volunteers arrived to help clean up after the weekend's festivities. Veterans pitched in too, eager to lend a hand. By mid-afternoon, the property looked as good as new, ready to welcome its next round of guests. Jacob watched it all with a sense of pride, knowing that every effort contributed to something greater than any one person. That evening, as the sun set once again, Jacob found himself back on the porch, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about Daniel often, imagining his friend standing beside him, clapping him on the shoulder and saying, "You did good, Jake." The thought brought tears to his eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude for the life he'd built, the people he'd met, and the future he now believed in. For the first time in years, Jacob felt at peace. Not because the pain had disappeared, it hadn't, but because he'd learned to carry it differently, to honor it, to grow from it, and to share it with others. And in doing so, he'd found a purpose bigger than himself. "This is just the beginning," he whispered to the fading light, a soft smile tugging at his lips. Months passed, and Miller's Haven became more than just a retreat. It became a beacon of hope for wounded veterans across the country. News of its success spread far and wide, thanks in large part to Emily Grant's articles and social media posts. Veterans who had once felt isolated or forgotten found solace within its borders. Families reunited under its roof, discovering new ways to connect after years of separation. Even those without ties to the military began visiting, inspired by the stories of resilience and community that emerged from the haven. Jacob Miller spent his days ensuring the retreat ran smoothly, but he also made time for himself. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he would wheel himself to the edge of the property and sit quietly, watching the colors of the sky shift and fade. It was during these moments that he reflected on how much his life had changed since that fateful day in court. The man who had once believed he had nothing left to give now saw purpose in every sunrise, every handshake, every shared meal. One such evening, Lisa Monroe joined him, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. She handed one to Jacob and sat beside him, on a wooden bench. "Beautiful night," she said softly, nodding toward the glowing horizon. "It is," Jacob agreed, taking a sip of the steaming liquid. "Hard to believe this place started with just an old plot of land and a dream." Lisa smiled, her eyes scanning the property. "Dreams have a way of growing when you nurture them, and you've done more than nurture this one. You've built something extraordinary." Jacob shook his head modestly. "I didn't do it alone. None of this would have been possible without people like you, Emily, and everyone else who pitched in." "That's true," Lisa admitted. "But don't sell yourself short. You were the spark that lit the fire. Without you, none of us would be here." Jacob didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his attention to the distant figures of veterans strolling along the trails. Some walked arm in arm, while others moved slowly, leaning on canes or crutches. Their laughter carried faintly on the breeze, mingling with the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Watching them, Jacob felt a deep sense of satisfaction. These were people who had been broken by war, illness, or loss, but here they were healing. Together. Emily Grant approached a short while later, her notebook tucked under her arm. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. "Of course not," Jacob replied, motioning for her to sit. "What brings you out here?" "I wanted to catch the sunset," Emily said, settling beside Lisa, "and maybe pick your brain for my next article. I'm thinking of writing about the long-term impact of places like this, not just for veterans, but for communities as a whole." "That's a big topic," Lisa remarked, raising an eyebrow. "It's worth exploring," Emily countered. "Places like Miller's Haven aren't just helping individuals. They're changing how we think about support systems. They're showing us what's possible when we come together." Jacob listened silently, letting the words sink in. He hadn't thought about the retreat in those terms before. To him it had always been personal, a way to honor Daniel, his grandfather, and all the others who had sacrificed so much. But hearing Emily frame it as something larger, a model for societal change, made him see it in a new light. "You're right," he said finally. "This place isn't just about me or even the veterans who visit. It's about reminding everyone that we're stronger when we stand together." Emily grinned, jotting down notes in her book. "Exactly. And that message needs to reach as many people as possible." As the conversation continued, Jacob found himself reflecting on the lessons he'd learned over the past year. Standing in court that day had been painful, not just physically but emotionally. It had forced him to confront parts of himself he'd rather keep buried. Yet it had also shown him the power of vulnerability, of owning his story instead of hiding from it. That moment had opened doors he never knew existed, connecting him to people who cared deeply about making a difference. The same was true for the veterans who came to the retreat. Many arrived burdened by guilt, anger, or grief. But through sharing their experiences, whether in group discussions, art therapy sessions, or casual conversations, they began to heal. They realized they weren't alone, that their struggles were valid, and that there was strength in leaning on others. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Lisa stood and stretched. "Well, I should get going," Early meeting tomorrow. Thanks for stopping by, Jacob said, offering her a grateful smile. You've been a rock through all of this. Anytime, Lisa replied, patting his shoulder warmly. Take care of yourself, okay? I will, Jacob promised. Once Lisa had gone, Emily turned to Jacob, her expression thoughtful. Do you ever think about Daniel? She asked gently. About what he might say if he could see all this. Jacob hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the horizon. All the time, he admitted. Sometimes I imagine him standing right here beside me, cracking jokes or teasing me about being too serious. Other times I picture him looking around at everything we've built, proud of what we've accomplished. And what do you think he'd say? Emily pressed. Jacob chuckled softly. He'd probably tell me to stop working so hard and enjoy the view. Then he'd remind me to keep fighting, for myself, for him, for everyone who doesn't have a voice anymore. Emily nodded, her eyes misty. Sounds like good advice. It is, Jacob agreed, and it's advice I plan to follow. They sat in silence for a while longer, listening to the sounds of the night. Eventually, Emily packed up her notebook and rose to leave. I'll let you have some peace, she said. But thanks for letting me bug you tonight. You're not bugging me, Jacob assured her. Come back anytime. After Emily left, Jacob remained where he was, gazing at the stars. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine trees and earth. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the pain, the losses, the moments of unexpected grace. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. For the first time in years, Jacob felt truly alive. Not because the scars of his past had disappeared, they hadn't, but because he'd learned to carry them differently, to honor them, to grow from them, and to share them with others. And in doing so, he'd found a purpose bigger than himself. This is just the beginning, he whispered to the fading light, a soft smile tugging at his lips. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. Together they would build a future filled with hope, healing, and humanity.